I know we need a little bit longer. We need a little bit longer. We just get started.
That music rocks.
Yeah, no, it's like, whoa, okay. Hey, welcome to episode number 131, Mastering Modern Selling. Tom Burton here. Are you a guest or a host? Well,
Yeah,
today
whatever you need me to be.
that's right. You can host and guest both.
I
So
can.
today Carson is our guest. And I think we have a really unique opportunity. We are going to dig in to your latest book, which came out late last year, October, I
Yeah.
think, somewhere around there.
Late October. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. That was intentional, Tom. I wanted it out before I turned 46. That was the goal I gave myself. And there was a reason why. We'll talk about that.
And your birthday's in November, if I remember right, from
November 1. That year
yeah.
prior, we had Mike Weinberg on the show for my birthday present and Leah Thompson.
And we had Leah Thompson, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Never
So
forget.
I don't know if we did so well last year, but anyway, so it's a very unique book. But I think, well, before we start, I first of all want to thank again, Brandon's not with us today, but our friends at Fist Bump for all the production and sponsorship in this. They also have, from what I understand, on April 11th, an upcoming webinar with Mark Hunter that is a bit of a not miss. They're going to really dig into some pretty interesting stuff. So if you like compelling, interesting webinars, the one on the 11th with Mark Hunter, I don't know if we'll have the link in the comments, but I'm sure we can get it there so you can sign up and join the webinar on the 11th. All right. So again, thanks for Fist Bump for that. So, hey, Carson, I think what we should do, like we do with all of our other guests, in case somebody doesn't know, give us the 30-second, 45-second of who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into the book.
Tom, what's funny is before we jumped in, when we were kind of in the green room, this is how it all began. This is how you and I first connected before the show and all of its iterations. It was just you and me talking online and doing a show. So it's kind of nostalgic to be back.
We've come full circle. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I briefly, I consider myself a lifelong student of sales. I've been really fortunate. I've been in the call center, one call close environment, all the way to carrying a bag as an account executive. And I've been a sales leader for many, many years. I've written 5 books, including the recent The Show Must Go On and Salesman on Fire. Those are the 2 you see back here. And co-host of sales shows and just an enthusiast of everything sales. I work for Microsoft today. I've been here 11 years and currently lead a team that supports about 1,500 nonprofits in North America.
And you're the co-host of the biggest and best modern selling podcast and show, if I'm not mistaken.
Better believe it, and proud of it.
Yeah. All right. So the book, right? As I was saying, before, and no BS, I think this is the coolest and one of the most unique sales books I've read because it's like a handbook. I mean, there is like, if you need something or you need some inspiration or you need a strategy or you need a tactic, I think it's in here somewhere along the way. So take us through kind of what you were thinking with this book, kind of the format of it, why you decided on that format. And I'd love to hear some of the feedback you're getting from people that are, using the book, because it's not just something you read and put down and that's the end of it.
No, thank you, Tom. It's one of those things. I think there's distinct parts of your career. In my 20s and early 30s, it was all about just chasing and climbing the ladder and learning and, just a rough, unpolished salesman. And then there was kind of a reinvention and finding ways to broaden my scope and my learning and get new experiences. And this current stage and the stage that, was really laid out in the book, it's, kind of what do you do when you've achieved a lot, but also, you have to continue bringing your best self every day. This one was kind of born out of the pandemic and where we have gone with the hybrid work world. People ask me all the time, like, how do you have time to write a book? You've got a family and full-time gig. I mean, it took almost 5 years to finish it, but I was intentional about it. And the reason that it's called "The Show Must Go On" is actually very much because of the song by Queen. If you look at the lyrics, inside my heart is breaking, my makeup may be flaking. I don't wear makeup, clearly, but the point in saying that is these experiences, going through negotiation of big deals, and the wins, the losses, the running on the hamster wheel. These things take their toll, and you just have to keep going. And especially when you have a lot of people that work for you, or I give speeches and I train in different countries and with different business groups within Microsoft and our partner ecosystem. I got to keep my wits about me, and it's not always easy. We're human beings at the end of the day, and so it's really about how do we keep going. But it's also my entire playbook, everything I've learned and experienced along the way. So I really left it all on the field with this one.
Yeah, and just if somebody doesn't have the book, right? I don't know. I think there's maybe 40 chapters, 40 individual chapters, each of which that has its own topic or theme associated with it. And look, I do like the fact that the print is, or there's a lot of space between the paragraphs, but there is if it helps, I put it in front of the camera. There is a lot of good information in here, really dense information in here about these different topics that you pull. I didn't realize it was 5 years. That's a long time to be calling this information together. But what I wanted to do is hit on some of the chapters that I thought were the most interesting. And this is, again, just going to be a small subset of them. But if I'm not mistaken, is called How You Made $1 Billion on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Landed over $1 billion from LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might be an interesting place to start.
I always find that when I'm talking to salespeople, it helps if you start with a result, right? Because it kind of shows like, hey, maybe this person has some kind of clue as to what he's talking about. That wasn't always the case. I didn't always have the result. Years ago when I picked up what was known as social selling, now I think it's really just selling or modern selling. It wasn't, it was kind of an anomaly. It wasn't very commonplace or mainstream. I picked it up at a small consultant firm where, the senior partner said, hey, use LinkedIn to try to find ways to stay top of mind. And, I was going out and trying to set up executive meetings, and I realized these folks were out on LinkedIn. I just needed to try to send compelling messages to get meetings. When I started working at Microsoft 11 years ago, and in a couple of different roles, I kept hearing like, hey, we're stuck in IT and procurement, and we need to get very large transformative relationships, and we need to get to the executives and to the board. And so again, I'm like, well, these folks are out on LinkedIn. And I realized early on, Tom, that it really came down to a few things that I could control. The quality of my message, the quantity of my outreach, and then just the consistency by which I was prospecting over time. And in essence, over the last 12 years, I've created a replicable plug and play Moneyball sales prospecting process. And it is guaranteed to work. I mean, it's living proof. The whole playbook is in the book, and it's generated over $1 billion that never would have existed without leveraging LinkedIn to create the first meeting, to stay top of mind as a messaging mechanism, as customer signals when there was merger activity or a new executive. I'm reacting and responding to this intel in my sales navigator feed, and reaching out to these executives immediately, beating my competition to the punch. Don't get me wrong. LinkedIn isn't a silver bullet. Nothing is. Just because I got into the room doesn't mean that they just fall over and hand you a PO. But what does happen is if you can get in the room and then you can uncover what is the unique value that I can bring this person and my company can bring this person. That's how you create transformative relationships that beget large deals. I will sum up by saying as well, one of the biggest things that you're going to have to do is figure out that unique value differentiator. I like to say, like, my organization has cloud, right? We have cloud solutions. A lot of our customers, they can buy cloud from anywhere, but they're not going to get me anywhere. They're not going to get my team anywhere. And there are very strategic relationships and resources that we can bring to bear. Sometimes the biggest value that I can bring these folks is I've been here so long that I have great relationships that I can leverage for the greater good of my customers. And that is works phenomenally in a meeting. That's actually why I came to this business unit, is to do what I love doing, but to be a tiny cog in the wheel for the greater good. So the reason that it's called that, that's the chapter, is it's the impetus for why that was a part of my process, how it became part of my process, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. My first year as an account executive, I had a manager that actually tried to get rid of me because the process was just gaining momentum. And I didn't hit my number the first year. And I could tell you a couple of reasons why. It's in the book. It's irrelevant here and now. The bottom line is I didn't hit the number and I was under the gun. But I committed to this process and I won every award there was, gotten multiple promotions, and I have everything I've ever chased because of it.
So is it safe to say, certainly LinkedIn's no silver bullet, right, or magic solution, but is it safe to say that LinkedIn is kind of and continues to be the heart and soul of a lot of your strategy and the success and the things that are outlined in the book?
Tom,
Without it,
last week I was in Seattle and I was sitting in the LinkedIn lounge and they interviewed me about how I had leveraged LinkedIn, but also how I was leveraging it today. I mean, I've opened up over 100 new executive relationships over the last year, just using LinkedIn. And, I'm even being asked by business development teams of customers that I serve to train them on how I do it. I mean, that's another element of the unique value that I can bring an organization that you're not going to get if you just go with my competition. So it's still the cornerstone. It's still a foundational component because it's such a phenomenal way of connecting with people that I never would have talked to otherwise. Now, once you get the connection is key, but you got to get the connection first. And that's what LinkedIn is so amazing at. I mean, it's like the largest convention or coffee shop in the world. And it's what you make of it.
Yeah, and obviously, if Brandon was here, right? That's exactly what he does with Fist Bump, is help these executives get comfortable, maybe, and competent with LinkedIn, right? I think there's two parts to it. It's being comfortable, but also how do you use it in a competent and confident way
Yes.
to start again building those relationships. So, all right. So I think then if that's kind of the foundation, let's move on to another chapter here. Again, one that was intriguing to me: how unemployment began my personal brand story. I think this was maybe the 10th or 11th chapter in the book.
I lost my job in 2010. I lost it again in 2012. Throughout that time, I applied to over 1,600 jobs, and I got one. And it only happened, in hindsight, it turns out that because I had written a book, and that's what made my resume stand out. It got me in the room to be one of 30 that were interviewed. And once I'm in the room, I earned the role, but getting there was half the battle. I thought, because of very successful sales director experience, that I was going to be able to just take my resume anywhere and walk in the door and make something close to what I was making before. And I was dead wrong. I had no network. And as I've learned in the intervening years, your network is your net worth. How you react and rely on others and also give to that community is so key. You've got to make investments in your network. But also when you're in need, you need to call a lifeline. And so having that is so valuable. It's fascinating because I went from, not even being able to get a whiff on my resume to, years in the last several where I've gotten multiple, very aggressive recruitments, multiple offers and things of that stature. I've stayed put for a lot of very personal reasons. And for me, Tom, it's always come down to the people, gravitating and aligning with the people that you want to work with and for, and working for an important mission. But that's how it started my journey, because I realized I had no network. That's also when I started understanding, because of writing the book, my publisher, they didn't do much for me, but they told me, like, hey, you need to go out on all these social platforms.
Yeah.
And so I did, started really betting big on LinkedIn and Twitter. And over the years, I've developed over 300,000 followers on these platforms, which has been incredible. I mean, it's been very serendipitous as well, because when there was an an engagements platform that Microsoft ran a few years ago. I was curating and sharing content, and I was generating more impressions than anybody else in the company. And so I was number one on this global scoreboard. And so people all over the world were reaching out like, who are you? How are you doing this? And it was because of that following. So um, I go back to that episode that we did with Anthony and Areno when you talk about like, even gratitude journaling and thinking about like great things that are happening in your life and why they're happening. There's a lot of things that are happening in my life today that I can point back to stuff that I did 10 years ago. And that's pretty impactful and powerful. I'm not going to give you like one sweeping statement of, hey, go out and do all of these things today, because it can be very overwhelming. But be intentional about how you go out and create relationships, your reputation and your brand, and where you're investing from that perspective. And then also the people in your sphere. It's vital that you're surrounding yourself with people that are going to level you up. And I learned all of that the hard way.
It's interesting. What I hear you saying is when you had a hard time getting that job, or you said you had 1,600, um, I guess 1,600 applications that you did,
Yeah.
which seems mind boggling. It sounds to me like it was a bit of a wake up call that this this challenge, the reason it was so challenging, is because your network didn't wasn't the level that you needed it to be. And I can equate that, I think, to sales, right? If you're out trying to, especially if you're in a new company or you're launching a new product and you're trying to go out and build that pipeline and with real qualified prospects, right? Which you wanted to go find a pipeline of real qualified candidates for employment, that relationship network becomes literally invaluable. But it seems like that was a bit of your wake up call, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah. I mean, you can do what's easy and what a lot of people are doing, which is apply to a job or rely on the same old relationships with people that may not be buying or have the juice to do something. It's easy for a reason. And, when you apply to a job, as an example, you may be one of 1,000 people applying to that job. And that's why hiring managers will hire somebody that's referred to them or someone that they know, because the risk to them is low. I go back to the episode that we did with Matt Dixon and talking about the jolt effect. And it's all about risk. I may have performed very well at the 1,600 jobs that I applied to, but they don't know that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times they'll go with somebody in the industry or already in the organization, somebody that they perceive is going to perform well because of experience, track record, et cetera. And when you don't have that, you have to rely on relationships and reputation. Every move I've ever made has been because of relationships and reputation. And frankly, to your point, Tom, that's what sales is all about, is we have to de-risk the decision that an organization is making as well to bet on us. And there's ways that we can do that. But you've got to realize, like, going at a sale or a deal, trying to go toe to toe with your competition's strength is not the way to do it. You can rarely go toe to toe on your competition's strength, especially if you're trying to unseat an incumbent. If somebody's already doing business with
Yeah.
somebody and you're trying to go toe to toe on their strength, you will lose.
Yeah.
And if you can go and determine what the organization doesn't like about that experience, and you can find ways to augment that, complement that, replace that, reprieve that, that's where you're going to have your best bet. And so it's a mindset shift, whether it's yourself, your reputation, your career, or selling.
So, it's an interesting, you brought up Matt Dixon. I don't want to go down another rabbit hole or we'll not get through any of these chapters, but the, his premise, right, in the book is fear of messing up, right?
Yes.
And and we see this, I think now more than ever. I think the concept in that book is more relevant than ever. And so then, therefore, what are your buyers doing? They're looking for ways to de-risk the decision so they minimize that risk of messing up. And having somebody they're working with that they have the social proof of the network, they see others that they're connected with or whatever, that very much directly or indirectly reduces the perceived risk and the fear of messing up. And I hadn't really thought about it directly like that, but anything that you can do, right? When you're trying to handle that fear of messing up, it's not always just explaining to them why they should not have that fear. It's letting them do their due diligence in a way that it inherently lessens that fear of messing up along the way.
I think
Which,
sometimes we run into the wall and we try to run at it the same way again. So many sellers, Tom, go to their prospect or their client and they just try to reiterate value like five different ways. And don't get me wrong, I mean, I was one of them several years ago on, cold calls and trying to get one call closes. And the fear of missing out, it's not like it can't work. Or these time bound offers that we put out there and then we try to pull the rug. I mean, these things can work, but it's a false positive. The real reality is the perceived risk that your prospect has. And if you can find a creative way to, first off, understand what that risk looks like to them, often it could be not wanting to make the decision that puts them on a negative path and gets that person fired. It could also be just finding ways to like share the risk. It could be the change management piece. Like, how can I come in and be a part of the post sale? Because so often a sales team or a seller sells something and then they're gone.
mhm,
And I mean, sellers get reputations for that, where customers will say, like, hey, you send your A team in to win the deal, and then the B
yeah,
team comes in and we're left high and dry, and that's why projects fail. It's,
yeah,
we have to think holistically about what is the client's risk. And if we meet them where they are and we de-risk that decision, the probability that they go with us goes up. We can't control everything, but we can
right,
control that.
right. But it goes way up. Going back to the money ball probabilities, right? All we're trying to do is increase the our probability of at least being in the game.
That's
So,
what it all comes down to.
all right. Next chapter I wanted to hit on. This is starting on page 140.
Yeah.
What is your superpower? And we've had Christy Jones on a few different times. Um, really emphasizes the importance of superpower. Tell us a little bit about that chapter, kind of what you were thinking, and what did you see as your superpower in all of this?
I want to say hi to Dominique. Thanks for the comment there. Superpowers, amazing concept. And there's some of these things that I don't know that I had a name for earlier on in my career, but you develop kind of a name for them and you bandy around the term. You hear this a lot more these days, I think. But when I think about superpowers, Tom, I think not only about, hey, what are my unique strengths? What are the things that I can bring to the table that are going to uniquely benefit my customer, my colleagues, and my leadership? For me personally, I learned very early on, especially in my time at Microsoft, that I was a connector. I was a community builder, whether that was with colleagues, sharing best practices, or going in and finding ways to get my customer connected with executives, with other leaders, with other people in their industry, trying to do things that would have value behind them, making deposits in that well of value investment with those relationships, because those things pay dividends. Those are those unique things that you can do that others don't. Again, look for the things that other people don't do that you can expound upon. I remember when I talked to my customers when I first started out as an account executive, I'd hear how unresponsive my predecessors were, or how, they only showed up when they were trying to sell something, and that they were already, in some cases, paying my company a lot of money, and they didn't feel like they were getting any value out of that. We only showed up when we wanted to collect. And so I just tried to be the exact opposite of that. I took very seriously the investment they were making. I brought resources to bear that they were already entitled to, that nobody was telling them about. And I earned my way to the table because they knew I was advocating for them. And so that being, doing those things and being an orchestrator, and really listening, those things were my superpowers. I don't know that you get the same feedback from my wife and kids. I try to listen as best I can here at home, but don't always succeed. But the other thing, Tom, that I think is important is that you also need to uncover the superpowers and the passions of the people you work for and with. You need to understand the, what are the problems you're trying to solve. A long time ago, I became a problem eliminator, which I borrow from the James Bond movie, License to Kill. Bond says that in the 1989 film. He's a problem eliminator. And I love that because I think about when my leadership would say, hey, our biggest problem is we don't have these relationships with the board and the CEO and the CFO. I went out and I got those relationships, figured out a templatized approach to do it successfully every time. And then I trained it and replicated it all over the world. But on the flip side of that, what are my superpowers of my colleagues? How do I amplify what they're doing? How do I put my team in a position to win? Because guess what, Tom? If you elevate everybody else around you, you win too. I would figure out the things that got my teammates paid. I would figure out like the strategic levers that mattered, and then I would be super transparent with my customers who also wanted to win. When we were working big deals, they had things they cared about, and I understood what mattered to them and what they were strong at. And I, was very transparent and communicative with them so that they knew what they were getting out of this deal, and they understood what mattered to me and to my team and to my company. So superpowers are everything because everybody comes to the table with very unique differentiators that make them special. And if we spend time uncovering what those are and we help others win, we win too. I've become far better as a seller, a leader, a human, since I focused a lot more on other people as opposed to myself. Yes, I was a 20 plus year old gunslinger, lone wolf, been there, done that. I was successful, but I've unlocked a lot more success by being a team player, an orchestrator, a collaborator, a quarterback.
I could hear it's going through my head as you're talking, and I'm sure it's going through our listeners' heads as well, right? Maybe not all of us are great orchestrators or community builders, but we all have, and Christy really nails this on what she talks about. We all have something or some things that are unique in what we do that make us special, right? In whatever it is that we're doing. And I believe that if you can identify that specialness, that superpower, regardless of your ability to build relationships, or are you an introvert or an extrovert or whatever those things, if you can spotlight that superpower, you will inherently build relationships because it's like law of attraction, right? People are attracted to the superpower that you're spotlighting and exploiting along the way. So I think there's a real, it's really thinking through, to your point, right? The superpower, and it's maybe again different superpowers, or at least derivatives of it, with different audiences or different constituents in your world that you're dealing with that are there. But really knowing those and having that confidence and understanding, I think will inherently build those relationships and start to build that community. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, if you're smart, you'll surround yourself, what I now call my sphere. You'll surround yourself with people that are going to up level you, fill gaps that maybe you have in your process. I know who to call in just about every situation, and that's often the greatest value that I can bring a customer. I am not overly technically savvy. I'm just an old sales guy that was in telecommunications, advertising, retail. I bounced around, but what I've learned through all that was the greatest value that I can bring is knowing is being responsive, being communicative, being transparent, but knowing who and what to do in every situation. And you learn a lot of that by doing. The beauty is somebody out there has probably done what you're looking to do. And so finding these people out there that can up level you, that have superpowers that maybe you don't or you want to develop, that can be
huge.
Game changer.
Yep. All right, let's move ahead to page 163. I think that's a few chapters ahead. And the title of this chapter is Who's in Your Head? So tell us about that one.
I remember when this one came up. It's funny, Tom, and I talk to a lot of people that say like, hey, I'd love to write a book. And I just tell them like, just write. Like, I think sometimes we get in our own way and, we stop for whatever reasons. But, the key element is like, for me, I just write and then I worry about the rest later. I wrote a lot of these as blog posts or articles and things of that stature. And then, eventually I just made an outline and put it all in there. My goal was to be very comprehensive and thorough and to think of every topic I could. And I remember distinctly the day that this one came to me. I was on vacation and I was playing basketball with my family, mostly, just shooting around. And, I remembered because I was playing quite well and I played very well in high school from a basketball standpoint. I had a year where I scored 20 a game. And, I may be, only 6'1", but I can hit from anywhere on the court. So I enjoyed the game. But I remember getting cut from my freshman basketball team. And I was small and scrawny when I got to high school, right? So, and I had actually skipped a grade in grade school. So I was a year behind, like developmentally, from everybody else on my team. And but in the moment, it doesn't matter. You're a kid, you get cut, you hate it. And my coach at the time said I had a low percentage shot. Well, I mean, I hit about 50%, unfortunately, from everywhere, even the free throw line at times. So I had to work on my free throw game like Shaquille O'Neal. But it stung, and it's like, so what's in your head? Who's in your head? I remembered that coach and him saying that I had a low percentage shot. And so I worked on my shot. And, the next year I was just draining from everywhere there was. I thought about, there's this movie about Vince Papale, who was he played for the Eagles, and I think you can find it on Netflix, but it's called Invincible. And he kept this letter that his ex-wife, wrote him about how she was leaving him and how, what a loser he was. And of course, that was before he made it. I keep an old appraisal that a manager who tried to get rid of me wrote once, and you use it as fuel and motivation. So when you think about who's in your head, you think about, like, what are those voices, those people that said you can't do it, can't be done, you're not good at this, you're not going to make it. That for me has always been fuel. There is no knockdown punch that has yet taken me out to the point where I don't get back up. And that has been resilience has been a defining element of my career. I mean, I've had things that have happened to me in my life and career that would flatten other people, and I just keep going. And again, that fuels back to the show must go on. We have to keep going. I've gotten, debilitating, crippling news, literally sitting in this chair, from somebody right outside this door, and I've turned right around and jumped on a call because I had to. And the show must go on. But these voices in your head, they're fuel. I love being told I can't do something, or that something is impossible, or it's never been done, because I feel like Barney Stinson in How I Met Your Mother, challenge accepted.
You're doing great with the TV and
I
movie
know. I
references
feel
today.
I feel primed.
You're in the
I'm
zone.
in.
You're in the zone. So I'll share basketball stories with you separately, but why? So I got cut from my junior varsity team, and it was very. I have to admit, at the time, it was like I wanted to go switch sports. Right at first, that was my first inclination. Screw it, I'll go, because I was also on the golf team, so
I
I'll just
played
go
golf
focus on
too. Yeah.
golf, and I want to play basketball. And but then it was like, after I got over the pity me and poor me, it was like, okay. And that you don't always have to use it as a way, I guess, to revenge or whatever. But I do think if you use those voices to say, because there was truth, there was truth in the reason why I got cut, right? It wasn't like the guy just didn't like me. There were things that I had to improve. So go improve them, right? And I think that's, what I hear you say is it may also be motivational, right? It's like George says, use that energy as motivation, as he puts in here, which I think is great. But I also think there's and a lot of truth to, in some cases, but in some cases, there's some that you can build on
No doubt
and learn
about
from
it.
as well. So
Sometimes that feedback can be biting and it can sting. And there's probably a kernel of truth even in the harshest feedback that you disagree with. I think that is important to realize.
all right. So I think this one's a little bit. It's a couple chapters ahead. And the chapter is fear in sales.
The
The
greatest
greatest fear in sales.
it's failure, Tom. Um, no, I remember this one because I had done a poll, and the nice thing about having a lot of followers is you can run a poll and get some decent data, right? And I remember running a poll about fear. And there's a lot of fears that people have, but a lot of it boils down to failing. It's rejection, it's being told no, it's getting fired, losing their job, but it's failure of some sort. And that can keep people from living to their potential, doing the things that they know or believe to be the right thing. And that's the biggest challenge. I feel very fortunate to be at this stage in my life and career where I don't operate with a lot of fear, because I've achieved pretty much everything that I've set out to achieve, and I know the right process. So even when things are chaotic all around me, I can put one foot in front of the other. But that's easier said than done, especially if you're starting out in your career. Maybe you haven't proven yourself, or you've got a manager who maybe hasn't been trained on how to be a great manager either. I mean, there's a lot of variables and factors. Um, I remember when I was starting out in sales, and there was a very strict call flow script process. And if you didn't follow it to a T, and they happened to listen to the recording of you, you could be written up. I had that happen to me, and I was the top seller in the office. I started going back and I followed their script, and my sales plummeted, and they removed the plan. But that's not common. So I think you've got to make sure that. And when I ran a call center years ago, I had a lot of people that would, by default, go to the lowest common denominator just to get a sale. They wouldn't sell in value. They wouldn't do any kind of needs analysis. They would just jump right in for this $39 a month package, this advertising program, just to get on the sales board and quote unquote, maybe get their manager off their back. But you couldn't sell those all month long and hit your number. It wasn't possible. But they would do it anyway because they thought, volume of sale, I'm going to get my manager off my back today. And I think we've got to be very careful when it comes to thinking about like all the definitions of failure in sales. I mean, these things can be very crushing, whether it's in the grand scheme of things. You've got a mortgage, you've got a family, you lose your job. That is terrifying. And we will absolutely do things sometimes to stay off the radar, not push back, maybe not push a deal to the limit because we're afraid of rocking the boat. Doing challenger sale types of questions with an executive, or some of the things that I've talked about on this show. Sometimes people don't do those things because they're afraid of being rejected, rocking the boat, losing a deal. But at the end of the day, failure is the biggest fear of any salesperson. It is, they don't want to be rejected, or even if they have a thicker skin for, hearing no, losing their job, or massive shift in their organization. We see layoffs happening. We see reorganizations happening in business today. And all of those things can cause and instill a lot of fear and anxiety.
Well, let's face it, right? That is measured, and maybe the only profession that's measured entirely by performance, right? Maybe other than a professional athlete, that's, what's your batting average, or how many points are you scoring per game? But other roles in businesses are not judged black and white way, right? Bad day at the office, but you can maybe, it's not life changing in terms. And sales is a little bit of a situation. So you inherit that fear that you may not have in another job.
Well, and eventually you're going to reach a point where, how high can you go? I talk to top performers, and sometimes their biggest fear is, I'm going to keep crushing this number, but eventually this quota is going to crush me, because the expectation keeps rising. Which also begets another key point is, sometimes you've got to be very strategic in your career and make moves. My best year on paper ever, won the biggest award in the company. I made a very strategic move, and I didn't have to be around for the next year when that territory hit 57%. I was in another role, another business, thriving. It's like a pendulum. And, there's going to be a lot of ups and downs in the business. And so navigating that can sometimes be very, very challenging.
What I hear you say is, be aware. Are you setting yourself up for failure? Situation you have, yes, and still fail, right? Hate upon the situation that exists.
I mean, if you run into a situation where you can avoid some of it, or you can proactively head it off at the pass, there is some value there.
want to jump ahead and then I'm going to go back. So I'm going to jump ahead to accelerate sales cycle timeline. One of the biggest questions I hear all the time. Things are problems, right? Sales timelines are getting elongated. There's more people in the process, especially for B2B. You know, FOMO or fear of messing up, all of those things, elongate cycles. Tell us, how do we accelerate? This is from
Yeah. Man, you said we're going to go forward and then we're going to go back. It reminded me of Back to the Future Part 2. That's the one Brandon was not in, by the way. When I think about this, Tom,
we know he may have
he
been
might
in
have.
it. He just hasn't
That's
told us
true.
yet.
He was in the 50s, we know, so he might have been in one of those back scenes. When I think about this, and I get questions about this one all the time, and it's very similar to like when you hear the old question, like, "Hey, how do I overcome this objection or that objection?" It starts at the beginning. It doesn't go right up to like, "Hey, why does this timeline keep slipping?" There's so many things that you can do from the get-go to make sure that you're on the same path and aligned with your customer and any other vendors or variables that exist. The first thing that I think is critical to do is make sure you're talking to the right stakeholders and that you understand the priorities. Furthermore, there's got to be that strategic mapping of, hey, we're going to go down this path together. These are our top priorities. These are the key stakeholders on both sides. These are the timelines, and this is the outcome. Because here's what you're going to run into is, let's say a timeline, a milestone is in risk of slipping. You're going to need to be able to call that out, and there needs to be mutual accountability established in the relationship. You've got to be able to go to the other executive and call out and say, hey, this milestone's coming up. You indicated to me very early on that this project is critical because of the outcome that you're trying to deliver. My fear is if we miss this milestone, that will not happen. So have our priorities shifted? Should I deprioritize this? I've allocated resources and people to prioritize this and get it done. But if you're telling me it's not a priority anymore, let me know so that we know to back off. And often you can leverage these types of things to get people to like either say like, oh yeah, sorry, that is still a priority. You're using their words and their concepts and their outcomes, their project to rekindle the dialogue around that one particular milestone, but also respectfully stress why it's so important to you. There's other things that you can do as far as, incentivizing milestones to potentially move up. One thing that I've really seen work very well in very strategic partnerships is creating kind of a living document between the two organizations. I mean, you can create it anywhere now that you can do shared documents with PowerPoint, it could be Excel, it could be OneNote, whatever it is. Yes, those are all Microsoft tools. Obviously, I work there. I'm not trying to sell you anything. But my point in saying all that is having that transparency and that mutual accountability where you're both looking at these priorities can be exceptionally helpful because, and I often recommend sales teams take a first pass at constructing this document and sending it across the bow and saying, look, I may make some mistakes here or some assumptions, like who's going to own this from your side. But the reason for doing this is, we talked about, maybe 20 projects. We obviously, we've got a lot going on, but when we meet weekly or bi-weekly or whatever it is, let's go through this and keep each other honest. Are there things that are moving? Are there things that we need to prioritize or deprioritize? Are there things that are falling behind or that are at risk? Because we've agreed going into this that this is a priority for you because of this. This is a priority for us because of this. And these are the milestones that need to happen between now and, the project going live. That we deem to be mission critical. And so those types of things can really help you accelerate timelines, keep timelines intact, but accelerating timelines, even if you anticipate, we operate off of a fiscal year. A lot of organizations operate on, quarterly and different finite timelines that they need to get deals done. So being able to go to those organizations and share with them, hey, our quarterly performance matters. We have a vested interest to get this done by the end of the quarter. Is there anything that we could do to accelerate this? At the end of the day, Tom, you want to earn the right to be the trusted advisor. And if you give them the peek behind the curtain and you instill in them the trust of what matters to your organization, if I can tell them, hey, my company cares about getting this done this quarter, we might be able to unlock some additional resources, or discounting, or funding, or people, or whatever it is. What would be tangibly meaningful to you? Those things can accelerate timelines. So nothing is foolproof. Nothing is guaranteed to work every time. But if you have a strong foundation, you have a good rapport and relationship, you have mutual accountability, you have people operating with all of the information, and you can be very candid with your customer, those types of things help you immensely.
So there's a lot there, but a couple things that jump out. One is engineer into your sales process the velocity, right? So don't let it just be happenstance and hope, right, that it's going to happen. Engineer that into the process right from the beginning. And I think related to that, your second point was, having that list, right, or that document that outlined the milestones. I think that's, people do discovery calls and all of that. I think early on, taking that discovery call data or the first couple call information, and I do think that putting it in writing creates a different impact than just verbally saying it. I mean, we all talk a lot, and things go in one ear and out the other. But when you put it in writing and they see it in front of them, they're forced to look at those things on paper. If something jumps out, whoa, that's not what I meant, or
Right.
whatever, you get that early, right? You at least get that data early along the way. Um, the second thing, and this goes to the question here from Duraj, right? He's saying how to create urgency for purchase in customer mind. Obviously, when you can find an impending event in the organization, right? That's, hey, maybe there's a deadline or they're going to get an audit. I sold for a company for many years where they would get audits, and if they didn't, and that audit was coming, and if they didn't get their shit together, they weren't going to pass the audit. So there was a clear impending event. But in a lot of cases, there is not an impending event that forces that decision. But I think what you were saying is, hey, if I can at least attempt to create an impending event, even if it's my own impending event, a lot of times people will rally around that as an impending event and they'll try and get it done. But other impending events can be their contract with a incumbent or a competitor is up, they're going on vacation, right? I mean, there's a million things that could be identified as an impending event that will either create the urgency to get it done or at least help you qualify as could it get done by that time frame.
Make your customer a hero. I remember an executive that I met on LinkedIn and got into his office before the competition because I met him on LinkedIn, and I didn't approach him trying to sell him anything. He was moving to town, and I offered to give him, feedback on places to look for schools for his kid, and places to live, and offered to outline our relationship with their company up to that point. I beat the competition into the office, and whereas they had 6 siloed businesses, of which we were in one of them, within a year we were in all 6. But the key element was seek to have a relationship with a customer executive where you understand and know what looks like a win to each other. You care about making them look good. You arm them with what they need to win when they present to the board, or to their CEO, or whatever it is. Like, those types of things go a long way. And then they're going to care a lot more about your milestones too. There's always a compelling event to be had. You just got to figure out what it is
You
and go
got
out
to
and
find
create it.
it, and to make it that there's an agreement there is that impending event, right? Because if you have an impending event, but they don't agree that's an impending event for them, then it doesn't exist. So we want to get that agreement around that, and that creates the urgency, at least to make a decision or to get to that point of, or if, like I said, if it's a qualification tool, because then you may find out, are they really serious or not
Right.
about what it is that's happening here. All right, I think we have time for one more. Um, like I said, I'm going to go back to the future to page 197, which is the daily sales non-negotiables. And maybe that's a good one to end off with here. What are the things that you just have to be doing day in and day out regardless.
I think about Jeb Blunt's, like sacred power hour of prospecting. I think about, when and how I come up with my non-negotiables. We all get pulled in a lot of different directions. And sometimes when you start your day, you're like, where do I start? There is a brief period of calm and clarity in my home, and it usually happens at about 5 a.m. when everybody's still asleep. Right. So that's when I'm, going to the gym and often that's where I get my best ideas. You get a chance to peek at your schedule for the day. First off, if stuff's on your calendar and you've got a crazy day, and it's not mission critical and it can punt, you need to punt it. You also need to be intentional about scheduling time for yourself and the fundamentals and the habits, the muscle that you need. Like whether even if it's like to just have a lunch with your significant other or your kid, like you have to have those breaks carved out in the day. But when I think about daily non-negotiables, I think about going down my list. Could be my pipeline, could be my prospects. What are the steps that I need to take today to make today a success? And that could be looking at my top deal, because I got to tell you, if you've got a deal that you're trying to land, sometimes it will take every single second possible that thing can take in order to get it done. I mean, I've gone to the absolute bell in order to get a deal in, and it took literally the entire year to get it done. These things will tend to expand. And so I highly recommend that if you've got something you want to achieve in a time frame, go down that list every single day. And ask yourself, is there something that I need to do or can do or could do or should do on this deal or with this relationship today? Do I call a customer? Do I ping a partner? Do I, check on the, internal selling? Like, my gosh, sometimes the most important and most challenging selling we do is internal. Selling internal stakeholders to care about our customer and our deal, and to unlock resources that we can pass along. And these things have timelines, and they take time. And so everything we do can take an investment of time. And so I think about being very intentional about my day. I apply what I like to call ruthless discipline to my schedule. I got that from Megan Reed, who I interviewed on a podcast a couple of years ago. And just looking at your day and saying, does this all make sense? Is this, aligned with my goals and what I need to get done today? And then I check these things off throughout the day. You're going to get pulled in a lot of different directions. You're going to have some of the minutia and the, updating your CRM and, doing call downs and, asked by leadership to do X, Y, Z. All these things are going to happen. You've got to find time to get done your non-negotiables. And often those are the things that I do before I get sucked into the Teams instant messages and the email and all that jazz, is I focus on my daily non-negotiables so that at least at the end of the day, I can look back and say, I can call it a win.
Well, and hey, I'm going to promote Microsoft, right? We all have our to-do list. I have Microsoft To-Do here that I print out on my, if you put those daily negotiables up at the top or non-negotiables up at the top, right? At least they're showing up in your face day in and day out, whether you printed it like I did or it's on your computer. I think that's a really, because it is very easy to get sucked into everything that's happening and you get away from, as you said, the daily non-negotiables that we usually will pay off much farther down the road. All right. Well, God, there's about, I don't know, 39 more chapters or so that we didn't cover today. Maybe we need to make this like a 14-part episode or a series or whatever. But hopefully, I think the people that are listening get an idea of some of the content that's in your book, Carson, and kind of I guess the spirit of which it was written and put together.
Yeah.
And there's just a lot of really good practical, maybe even be an understatement, practical application pieces in here. So if you don't have the book, I highly recommend you get it. It's on Amazon. I'm sure, I know it's on Amazon because I bought it on Amazon. So, or anywhere else you can get a book and check it out. And yeah, I think we will do a part 2 at some point here when we have another.
Anytime, my friend. I'm very grateful. I'm appreciative, to even be at the stage and the point where I could write something this comprehensive about sales and my experience, leadership, failure. What got you to this level won't get you to the next level finding mentors, finding sponsors, taking your career by the reins. I've learned a lot, man. I've been really fortunate and blessed, and it's all in the book. And that is, I left it all in the field with this one. I get asked a lot too about the audiobook. I'm actually in the process of recording it now. It'll be out this year. Because look, I'm cognizant, like, for my competition, my entire playbook is here. Come and get me. But I know that not everybody can sit down and read a 300+ page book. But there's a lot of material, and I'm an open book. I'm more than happy to share because I do it for love of the game, Tom. Sales have been super, super good to me. I met my wife in sales, and I have everything I've ever wanted. And if anything, I want to give back to the sales ecosystem that has been so good to me.
I think your next book is for the love of the game.
Actually, my next one is going to be called "A Salesman Looks at 50." I gave myself a few years to write that.
Okay. Well, that's come and gone for me. So I won't say which one I'm looking at, but all right. Well, thanks everybody. Great comments, great questions. Thank you, Carson. This has been a great episode. There's some really good snippets in here. And you'll be back next week as a host, I believe. And I'm pretty sure we have a guest, but I'm not sure who. But I think we'll all be back as hosts next week. So
Can't wait.
you for being our guest.
Always, Tom.
I'm going to let you close it out as a co-host, though.
All right, Tom, thanks, man. And thanks to everybody for joining. And Jennifer, good to see you as always. George, Dominique, thanks for being on. Daraj. Until next time, happy modern selling.
Thanks, everyone.